These glasses. Thanks.
You break my paper.
Always teacher. You guys get your interviews done?
Yeah.
No.
What do we do with it? Wait, I already shared mine.
I know. I'm giving time in class, but if we can, I'd like to get on my time.
How long would you like to find out? Oh, I got it.
Answer. It needs to answer a question. I'm not impressed with the fluff. If you can print it out. Hi guys, hello. Hey. Oh, I don't know if this is good news or bad news for you guys, but I was over lunch kind of checking on forecast, just kind of getting a sense what Saturday is looking like. And by the way, the system that's going to hit us on Saturday is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right? Which, you know, it seems laughable, right? That something that is, you know, like hundreds of thousands of miles away, that we can in any way, shape, or form accurately say will dump a foot of snow on us 4 days away from that. Right? It boggles my mind. But as it tends to do, and I'll give meteorologists credit. I watch Channel 13. I don't know what. I mean, I know you guys are always like watching the news, but right, yeah. SportsCenter doesn't count. But Channel 13, I'll give them credit. They've been like, you know, we're not gonna give you a definitive answer on this forecast until we get closer to it because it can change. And they've already started changing it. Just about an hour ago, they were posting saying that new model was coming out looking like maybe significantly less snow than what they had originally forecast. I'm okay with that. I hate it. Trust me, the older you get, the less esteem you hold for winter. Okay?
Yeah.
You know, actually, it is. I was talking about this earlier. It's funny you said it. I broke my pinky when I was in high school. I don't know if any of you have ever broken just a finger on a hand. I don't know if they did for you, but I broke the smallest finger on my hand, and they gave me a cast up to here. That's not really important to the story, but I stick that right there. It just throbs when it gets cold. Really, I didn't believe those stories until I had to experience. No, it's just you got to, you know, I'm paying my own electric bill. Got over that, you know. I'm the dad, so I'm the one who's got to shovel the driveway. I've got two sons, and their time is coming. Their time is coming to shovel and weeding, all of that. It's just, you know, they're like 5. So. Anyway, so the older you get, you know, it's not as fun. It's fun for like an hour when you get the kids out and you build a snowman, and then after that it's just terrible. So, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a little less stuff. All right. Hey, with regards to the class, you know, 5th period. This is always a challenge for me because it's you know, you're one of 3 sections of the class that I have. And so, so generally what I try to do is I really try to keep you on pace with the other U.S. history classes as much as I can. So we're gonna hold true to that today. I think I had said this before, that today we were gonna have a little bit in the way of some notes. They're not notes like what you might be used to. If you remember, I give you the questions and we try to answer the essential questions. And we're gonna hold true to that. It's just that the other classes I've just said, you know, hey, we're only going to get to this point, and then that's it. So with you guys, I'm going to do the same thing. We'll get to that same point, basically get through question 5, and then we'll stop for the day, and then we'll finish up tomorrow. Now, I said this yesterday. I think we'll go a full day tomorrow. I don't know. What do I know? But assuming that we go a full day tomorrow, we will take some time and finish these questions, and then the time that we have left at the end, which I would guess would be about 25, 30 minutes, will be yours for this exit slip. So when we get to that point tomorrow, you will get back your packet that we did last week. You will get back the stuff that we finished up yesterday. By the way, if you don't have that turned in yet, front, back, we looked at the reforms and the reformers. Make sure that gets into the basket. You'll get that back. And then you'll have these questions, these notes, that you'll be able to use. And as long as you've got all three of those, you should be in good shape for a really strong grade there. And then after the exit slip is done, we'll turn the questions in. I always give some points for showing up, paying attention, and so forth. I'll do that again here. So let me get these questions out to you. We'll get through that question 5, and then you guys will undoubtedly have some free time there at the end. Originally, Saturday I won't ground you. It's okay.
It's good to see you. You always seem shocked when I'm nice.
No,
Are there not enough people nice?
Yeah, but that's not the
Well, we
point.
need to deal with it.
I mean, like, you said only hi to me, like, didn't say hi to anyone else when you were walking, so just say
I
hi
just
to
see you right there.
working on this paper, I have no idea. Wait,
What one?
Matt.
Oh,
You're so two-faced.
I thought it was for me.
I don't know what happened yesterday, and you're like,
Oh yeah, Mr. Klein, book talk, complete fail.
What is that?
That book talk I was worried about yesterday? Yeah,
Oh, it didn't go well?
no.
See, you did well.
I listened to her whole thing.
I have zero doubt, Hannah, that you did.
You want B plus. B's for diploma.
I know, right?
Sure.
All, some, what? What do you guys want? All, some?
Some.
All of them.
Oh.
Just keep it like that. Keep it like
Hold on, I'll tell you right now.
I'm the one. Oh, that's the
Oh, no, what a
Did
tease.
she just have that look?
Spirits, if you are with us. What is your name?
It's time for another. How am I doing that?
Hey,
It's time for another seance.
everybody gather around on that.
That is weird. It's probably just a small electrical short causing a massive fire. No worries.
It will explode within 5 or 10 days.
No, but like when you were giving a book talk, they should just have that look too, like talking about.
All right, let's go ahead and get rolling here, please. Okay, as we take a look through the questions, like I said, our goal for today, and this is the one class that I feel confident that we'll hit it, is that we'll get through question 5, and then the rest of those we'll be able to finish up tomorrow. That's going to be really. But look, stop. Stop. Then we got to tighten the bulb. I think that's right.
Well, turn it off first.
I thought you said.
Why? Why?
Turn yourself.
Why? There's no fun in that.
Yeah, it's gonna be hot.
Well, it was only on for a minute.
It's still on fire on the inside.
I'm fired.
I think that's how
That's how that works. It's a vacuum of fire.
Why make it sound like there's an open flame? That's how it works. I can't explain it any other way. Yeah, right. Okay, all right, let's get back to it now. If you'll notice, question number 1, we're going to answer question 1 kind of together here before we get into anything that I might put up here on the screen. This entire 2 weeks that we've been back from winter break has been all tied into this progressive era. And I'd like to think that if you've been paying attention, you've heard me say the term progressive era multiple times over the course of the past 2 weeks. I guess, the biggest thing I want to start off with is to make sure that you understand why we use that term to describe the time period. First off, let's make sure that we know what time period we're talking about here. Okay, so 1890. It's hard to pinpoint an exact year, but I think that year works well for us as the starting point for this time period. As far as when it ends, I think that, I kind of put like 1915, 1920 up there, but we could probably basically say right up to World War when the United States gets involved in World War I. That's going to represent the ending point for this particular time period. Now, the key word in progressive era is what? It's progress. And how would you define progress? Or improving, moving forward. Bo's got several words coming here. Or social or technological. Okay, yeah, that's it. All right. But no, yeah, I mean, typically, I think when we hear the term progress, we usually think of it in a pretty positive way. Connor said moving forward, improving, yeah, sure. And I know that we looked at a lot of really nasty stuff. We looked at a lot of bad stuff, down stuff. But what I was trying to do then, I think I explained it this way, was that we had to look at just how bad things were in so many different areas so that we could come in earlier this week and look at all the ways that Americans fought to make things better. At the beginning of that time period, that 1890, we had a lot of kids, really young kids, working in factories. You've seen some of those images. You're actually going to see a few more next week. When you look at those images, I don't know if it has any sort of emotional impact on you. Probably doesn't. But for me, it's always real heartbreaking as a father to see. I've got a 10-year-old son, and if we were alive in 1890, there's a chance that instead of being over in Miss Spalding's 4th grade class right now, you'd be working in some kind of factory. That it brings some of that to reality. By the time we get out of that time, we have progressed to a point where there's certainly a lot less kids working in these factories. Things are better. At the beginning of this time period, we had the food realities of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. By the time we come out of this time period, we've got laws like Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meatpacking Act. Okay, so progress. At the beginning of this time period, women could not vote. By the end of it, women certainly could. So progressive. That's really, it's those improvements, it's those big steps forward. That's where this time period gets its name. That's question one. Now, what I want to do today, just as we start to wrap this up, is to explain to you that it's not just those reforms where it's here at home, it's in our country, it's focused on things like food production, labor, and stuff like that. Another way that some people might define progress is when we look at ourselves as an entire country and we see that in 1890, other countries knew who we were. We did a lot of trade with other countries. But I don't know that I would say we were a respected world power in 1890. But again, by the time we come out of that time period, we absolutely are. So there are some, I think, who would label that as progress as well. And it's that. It's how do we go from known but maybe not respected to world power. That's what I want to look at today. Are those examples of how we go about doing it. Okay? So here's over in the margins. You've got margins on the left, the right. Before we get rolling too much here, I did want to, I guess a good place I thought for us to start might be to look at, the way that we progressed in terms of American leadership. And, we were coming out of this time period here known as the Gilded Age, and I think that that time period has been described to you as an overall pretty negative time. All right, we don't have effective leadership. It's a country that is in many ways being run by the John D. Rockefellers, and it is giving us these problems that we have looked at over the past couple of years. And so it's that idea of ineffective leadership that I wanted to start with, because once again, by the time we come out of this time period, we're going to have some pretty well-known, strong presidents. Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, and onward. So understanding the change in leadership was, I think, a big part of this as well. So one thing that I've tried to do, and you may have noticed this, we had states and capitals in December. In May, we have a similar style test. It's over presidents, though. And so I've gone over, made sure that we've gone over presidents. Remember, I had a list going over here of 1 through 6 when we talked about John Q. Adams, Andrew Jackson. I tried to take that time to go through. So we're going to kind of run through a similar list here that are going to represent a lot of the people that come post-Lincoln. Right? So we're going to pick up with president number 19. And what we're going to see here is in this time heading up to the progressive era, we have a series of truly unimpressive presidents of the United States. Okay? So we'll just do a quick list here. I want to start with this guy, Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, what I would like for you to do is in the margin, either left and right, is have your list go. So that when we come back in May, hopefully you've got something that you can go back to. So 19 is Rutherford B. Hayes. The first thing I would ask you to notice is the beard. Have you noticed that we haven't had a president with facial hair in a really long time? In fact, this is just, I don't know if it's a weird coincidence or what, but once we get to the progressive era of presidents, we will not have another president with facial hair after Teddy Roosevelt. I forgot Taft. Teddy Roosevelt and Taft. That's it. 2 guys. The rest are going to be clean shaven all the way through Trump. I don't know. Somebody said once that beards reflect people you can't trust. I personally hope that's not true. Okay. Hopefully that's not true. But I want to start with Hayes. And Hayes is this interesting guy. Maybe we've identified the ghost. Rutherford B. Hayes sucks. No, that's not it. It's probably some Hayes supporter, Hayes voter. Okay. Anyway, Rutherford B. Hayes stands out for one reason in my mind, and that's that he became president of the United States, and he didn't win. He didn't win anything. He didn't get the most votes. He didn't even get the most votes in something called the Electoral College. Now, we just had a presidential election. And in that presidential election, I don't care what you think of Clinton or Trump, I really don't. But there's no denying the fact that Hillary Clinton won more votes than Donald Trump, to the tune of about 2.5 million more votes. But in the Electoral College, Donald Trump won more votes. And that's how he became president. Rutherford B. Hayes lost both and still became president of the United States. Truly a fascinating thing. The reason why is because he was so close. It was kind of like a John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson deal, where they were so close that they had to move on to somebody else to make the decision. And so Rutherford B. Hayes made a deal, backroom sort of slimy deal, with the southern states, the states that had made up the Confederacy. And he said, look, if you guys will give me all of your votes, I will end Reconstruction, which was that time period right after the Civil War, where the South is basically being placed in a corner and told what to do. So Hayes said, give me your votes, I'll end Reconstruction, and you can go back to doing your thing. They said, sounds good, and here he is, President of the United States. It was very corrupt, and Americans really didn't care for that. They felt dirty. This guy didn't really deserve to be there. So in 1880, we see the United States elect this guy, James Garfield. People are really excited about James Garfield. He's a Civil War hero. He's, a good, clean candidate. Somebody that Americans can get excited about. Feels a lot better after Rutherford B. Hayes. People get really excited. The guy is in office for 1 year. He's at a Baltimore train station, and somebody walks up and shoots him. That's a bummer. Yeah. Now, as it turned out, it was some guy who was a little nuts, not totally there. He was upset because President Garfield had not given him a job. So he decided the right way to get revenge is to kill him. Now, what's kind of interesting though is that Garfield didn't die immediately. He got shot in the chest. And honestly, most doctors will say that they think that he would have survived if they could have gotten the bullet out. They didn't have the technology that they have today, and so they were having trouble locating the bullet. And if you guys can imagine, all right, now if that had happened today, you could do some X-ray and you could find that bullet, and you could surgically remove it. Back then, they had this long, I don't know how to describe it except for to say it's a long-looking pole, and they just jab it in the hole and find the bullet, and then pull it out. I mean, the pain had to have been intense. So they couldn't find it, and so they brought in Alexander Graham Bell. What's he best known?
Telephone?
Exactly, right? They thought that they could adopt that technology as a way to find the bullet. I don't know how that works. It didn't work, and he died. It didn't work, and he died. And so that elevated, of course, his vice president. And he's probably best known for his impressive facial hair. That is the walrus himself, Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur, a guy who probably never should have become president, but he did. And, after he serves out the rest of Garfield's term, we're going to have a changeover in leadership here. So we have 4 years as president, 1 year, 3 years. We're getting a lot of turnover here. We're going to have another new president coming up next, and that is Grover Cleveland. Now, Grover Cleveland, I think, stands out for probably 2 reasons, and neither of them are impressive. All right, number 1, Grover Cleveland had a little daughter who apparently was absolutely adorable. Have you guys ever heard of Shirley Temple? Yeah. Again, grandparents on the list. His daughter was like the Shirley Temple of the time, adorable, sweet, just a cutie. Little Ruth, no. All right, her name was Ruth, little Ruth Cleveland, and the newspapers just loved her, little baby Ruth, and eventually they ended up naming a candy bar after her. No. Baby Ruth. Baby Ruth. I thought it was obvious, but maybe not. So a lot, everyone always just assumes that was a joke, wasn't it? Oh, it wasn't a joke. Please, just say yeah, it was a joke. Okay, there you go. Right? But everybody assumes Baby Ruth Candy Bar was named after, of course, Babe Ruth. No, it was named after his daughter. So again, that's nothing to do with him. I just think it's interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting about Grover Cleveland is that he serves his 4-year term, and he runs for re-election, and he gets beat by this guy. Again, not too impressive. In fact, the only, I think, notable thing about Benjamin Harrison is that he is Indiana's only president. He's from Indiana. Born in Ohio, but he grew up in Indiana. And if you go down to Indy, you can actually visit the President Benjamin Harrison home. He serves his 4-year term, runs for re-election, and he gets beat by Grover Cleveland. So Grover Cleveland moved in, moved out, moved back in. And again, I don't know that that's overly impressive that he was able to get re-elected. But that's kind of how it stands out, guys. We have a list here of rather unimpressive gentlemen serving as President of the United States. Fortunately, we get to the election of 1896, and notice now we're into the progressive era. And in the election of 1896, we're going to get back to having our sort of formidable, impressive men who are going to get elected as president. And the guy that gets elected here is named William McKinley. Notice no beard. Yes, he does have eyebrows. And they're rather full. All right. Now, William McKinley's from Ohio. I think that's noteworthy because Hayes is Ohio, Garfield's Ohio, Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, William McKinley, Ohio. So it was a good stretch for the Indiana, Ohio area. McKinley was a pretty good public speaker. People really were attracted to this guy. And this is right when you start to see the Republican Party start to set up camp here in the Midwest. This is kind of when it gets started. Pretty popular guy, gets reelected. We haven't had anybody, unless you count Cleveland, who's gotten reelected again until we get to McKinley. Pretty popular guy. His vice president's pretty well known. Guy named Teddy Roosevelt. Okay. And again, really popular, very similar to Garfield. People are pretty excited about this guy. In fact, unfortunately, he's too similar to Garfield. You get shot. Okay. We have this. It's 1901, and it's we just entered into the 20th century now, so people are pretty excited about this. And back at that time, all around the world they would hold these things called World's Fair. And some of that may sound familiar to you because didn't you do a World's Fair thing at the elementary school? So this was a little bigger than that, not surprisingly. And what it was an opportunity for countries from around the world to bring like this new great thing that their country had produced or invented to show off at the World's Fair. In fact, at this World's Fair, it was the first time that anyone in the world had seen the Ferris wheel. That was like France's big thing. And so as the President of the United States in 1901, it was in the United States, and it was in Buffalo, New York. Why it was in Buffalo, of all places, I don't know. But that's where they held it. And so the President goes up to Buffalo, and as he's walking through the crowd, a gentleman walks up to him. He's got his hand entirely wrapped in white cloth. He walks up to him, and he just starts shooting him point blank. Back then, you could just walk up to the President. And I thought I'd send this around. This is the newspaper from the day that McKinley was shot. Kind of neat to see from Chicago there. So unfortunately, now we have yet another guy who Americans are pretty excited about, who ends up, there's also another Ohio guy, and he ends up getting shot. But that does elevate the great progressive era president. And that is our guy over here that Bose had his resting in. Teddy Roosevelt. Right? So he does not become president unless William McKinley gets shot. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about Teddy Rowe over the course of, probably we'll get into him more tomorrow. But I mean, he is the great progressive era president. Okay? So there is your sort of president review. Make sure that you have those in the margins so that you can go back to it. All right, let's get back to the questions here. Like I said, question 5 is where I'd like to stop for the day. And there's 2 vocab terms that you have got to be able to define within this discussion. These are 2 really important terms, not just for what we're covering right now, but because we're going to go back and reference these terms time and time again all the way through World War II. That is imperialism and isolationism. That happens to be question 2 and question 3. Okay, so let's talk about imperialism first. Now, there were several countries at this time, turn of the century, 1900s, several countries, especially in Europe, that we would call imperialist countries. All right, this would be a country like Great Britain. Great Britain spent a long time building a worldwide empire. In fact, they used to say that Great Britain owned so much land across the world that the sun never set on the British Empire. It always was shining on something that Britain owned. Britain is an example of an imperialist country. So in question 2, what is imperialism? That would be a country that is actively trying to expand, trying to build an empire, looking to conquer territory across the world that they can make into a colony. Even the tiny country of Belgium is going to go out and grab a colony in Africa. So that's imperialism. You're out there, you are active in the world, you're trying to build an empire, you're trying to gain colonies. That's imperialist. Now, going to question 3, what is isolationism? You could probably define that on your own right now. You might have a guess. It's the exact opposite of imperialism. I mean, yeah, that's it. To isolate yourself. To only worry about the problems and the issues inside your own country. You're not out there. You don't care what other countries are doing. You're not trying to gain colonies. You just focus on yourself at home. And we're going to see the United States go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between the two. I would say that at this point, the progressive era, the United States is an imperialist country. They are trying to build a bit of an empire. But by the time we get to World War I, we've become more isolationist. Once we finally get into World War I would argue we flip back. We kind of just keep flipping, flopping, all the way through World War II. Okay? So I want to introduce those terms now so that you understand how they work. So at this point, like I've said, I think the U.S. would be an imperialist country, and I, give you some examples of areas of land that we're going to grab hold of. We got to start with Alaska and Hawaii. Now we know those as two U.S. states, but they haven't been U.S. states for very long. All right. In fact, let me ask you this: I've got two American flags up here, flanking the projection screen. Okay. Which of those flags is what we would term as a current U.S. flag? If you're going to do the pledge, which one should you be pointing at, Ellen? And why the left one? Like how many? Two more seconds. Okay. So what we've got here, and I love these flags. They got some fun stories to them. This flag over here, this is what we call a pre-59 flag. Alaska and Hawaii both become states in 1959. I mean, think about that. Some of you may have parents. My parents were born in 54 and 55. So when they were born, Alaska and Hawaii were states. This is a pre-59 flag. It's legit. It's not like some Amazon.com purchase or something like that. Actually, a weird story with this. My great aunt was a hoarder. You know what that means?
Yes.
My sinuses are still kind of messing me up on my voice. You did hear the D, right? She is a hoarder. Okay. Be clear on that. Hoarder. 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 Okay? My great aunt was a hoarder. All right? And I had to make clear on that because in third period, I had this kid give me a look like she was a hoarder. She was a hoarder. And so when she passed, we had to go in and try to clean out her house. And I mean, newspapers as tall as me. I don't know why, but it was wild. So we went into her bathroom, and her bathtub was just full of stuff. And so we started chucking stuff out. Most of it went into a dumpster. But at the very bottom of her bathtub was this flag, which I thought was kind of weird. But I also thought it was kind of cool, so I hung it in my room. So the last place this was, other than right here, was my great aunt's bathtub. That flag flew over the White House, which is kind of weird. My grandmother had a good friend of hers that was in the CIA. She was not a spy or anything fun like that. But when she retired, which was in the 1970s, she was given a flag as a gift from President Nixon. And for whatever reason, she gave that to my grandmother, and then my grandmother gave it to me. I liked history, so that's kind of a fun story there. But yeah, so we got, I always like to illustrate that when we talk about Alaska and Hawaii. And let's just real quick here, let's talk about Alaska. Now, Alaska today, I mean, it's really cold, but it's also, a really important state for us. There's a lot of oil in Alaska. And there's a lot of fishing in Alaska. In fact, one of my favorite shows used to be Deadliest Catch. I love Deadliest Catch. So we got a lot of the crab industry, lobster industry, fishing. It's huge up there. It really is a very economically beneficial state for us. But when it was purchased in 1867, it was a big joke. And now you notice the year. It's pretty darn close to Abe Lincoln. And the Secretary of State at that time was a guy named William Seward. That was a really well-known guy back then. In fact, on the night that Lincoln was shot, there were other people who were supposed to die that night. All right, there was a guy sent to kill the vice president. There was another guy sent out to kill Ulysses S. Grant. And there was a guy sent to kill Secretary of State William Seward. And Seward was the only other person that night who was physically harmed. In fact, he got this close to also being killed. The guy that attacked him, at that point, Seward had been really ill, and he was stuck in bed. And so the guy that was sent to kill him actually broke into his house, ran upstairs, jumped on top of him with a knife, and stabbed him repeatedly.
More than once.
Yeah, multiple times. And I mean, he was very near death. Now, somehow he survived. I don't know how he survived that, but he did. And so in 1867, he's still around and he's still Secretary of State. And he finds out that there's this giant chunk of land up near Canada that Russia owns and is trying to sell because they need some money. And he thinks, hey, this could be big for us. You know, fishing is huge up there. We have a lot of Americans that at that point are in whaling. You know, that was the way you lit your home most of the time, was through whaling. So we could own that chunk of land. That would be a place where our whaling vessels could park, take on food and gas. This could be big. All right? So he orchestrated this purchase of Alaska. And I wrote down, because it is a crazy purchase here. He ends up buying it by the acre for $1.50. $1.50 an acre. He buys all of what will become Alaska. Now, despite the fact that he bought it super cheap, people find it to be a joke. In fact, they call it Seward's Folly. Sometimes they call it Seward's Icebox. It's a huge joke. Everybody thinks, why are we buying this big old chunk of ice? It's really funny until, they strike gold up there. And then all of a sudden, boy, hey, that was a great purchase, man. Way to go. Way to go. All right. So here we go. Question 4. What was Alaska jokingly called? Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox? I got a little political cartoon down here that kind of illustrates it. This is William Seward right here. He's got this iceberg in the back, 1959, we'll see Alaska finally get the population to achieve statehood. And I don't know if you've ever seen the flag. Speaking of flags, flag of Alaska. It's like midnight blue, and it's got the Big Dipper on it. What's kind of cool is in 1959, when they became a state, they went to elementary schools in Alaska and made the flag design a contest. And the kid whose design was picked was like a 3rd grader. Bless you. And it was his design that became the state flag of Alaska. So with that said, that's where I ended my other U.S. history sections. That's where I'm going to stop with you guys. Tomorrow when we get back in, we'll pick up with 6. We'll start talking about Hawaii. I'm fine, Hawaii. Yes.
You're the senator, right?
Secretary of State.
Okay.
I'll write that over here. If I can find mine.
And why did he do this?
Yeah, I wrote Seward was Secretary of State. All right, any other questions?
No.
All right, so you guys can hold on to these 4 if you feel like you're going to lose it. Put it back in the tray with your name on it. Get back out to you. Don't forget, by the time you leave, you got to make sure you have yesterday's assignment turned into the basket. Everybody get a chance to see the newspaper? If you would like to see the newspaper on the day that Lincoln was shot, I've also got that.
getting shot.
We talked about,
You're getting shot.
the progress. Child labor.
I took notes.
But, you know, all of these different.
We got it. No. Hey, where's your 205? I think we took notes.
I think
We got
it's on my
and then
computer. What time?
yesterday-
205.
2:05.
And so we should get him at next Thursday. So she won't-
2:05.
I know, I really don't understand.